Buonasera a tutti. Io ho il grande piacere di presentarvi Guy Cools. È un drammaturgo della danza. Attualmente è professore all'Istituto di ricerca Arts in Society in Tilburg e professore ospite all'Università di Ghent. Tra gli altri ha lavorato come critico di danza, curatore e drammaturgo di produzione, collaborando con Sidi Larbi Sharkawi, Akram Khan, Stephanie Tiersch. Le sue più recenti pubblicazioni includono The Ethics of Art, Ecological Turns in the Performing Arts, pubblicato nel 2014, e l'ultima pubblicazione, uscita nel 2016, è Imaginative Bodies, Dialogues in Performance Practice, pubblicato da Valis. Oggi Guy ci porta questa lecture dal titolo Dance Dramaturgy as a Creative and Somatic Practice.
Grazie per the introduction. Also thank you Erika and Carlotta and Gerarda for inviting me here. Maybe I should start with apologizing that I'm the fourth male speaker in a row. And the second, tall guy from Belgium. As some already mentioned, I think there's more reason. I think there's something about the practice of a dramaturg, also dance dramaturg, that has particular associated to female qualities, in the sense that you're most of the time in an invisible, supportive, receptive role. And as was already mentioned also in the beginning, in Alessandro's overview, a lot of the role models of the profession are all female. Like in Belgium, it was Marianne van Kerkhove, who the conference has been dedicated to. Heidi Gilpin, who was the first dramaturg of Foresight. Elizabeth Langley, who was one of the role models in Canada. And also today, we have a lot of female colleagues, like Hildegard de Vuist, who's a dramaturg of Alain Platel since the beginning of his career. Georgina Kakoudaki, who's a good friend, who's an important Greek dance dramaturg, who's been worked with generations of Greek choreographers. Ruth Little, who's an extremely important UK-based Australian dramaturg. So there's a lot of women around in this profession as well. And I think it's just accidental that it's four men that turn up talking about it. I want to do two things. As I said, my original title was Dance Dramaturgy as a Creative and Somatic Practice. This is also the title of my practice-based PhD research, which I finished in 2014. And it's been the topic that I regularly use as a title for my talks. At the same time, I started, only 2 weeks ago, I was in Canada, also to give a series of talks, and I decided to focus in a little bit on this notion of the witness role. So what I'll do is my talk will be in two parts. The first part will be a more general my vision on dance dramaturgy, and somehow I will repeat some of the things that have already been said and maybe just offer you other images, other metaphors to think about it. And then I will zoom in on one particular part of that function, which is that of being a witness, which is for me one of the essential parts of the task. As Bart already mentioned, also Stefano, you don't need a dramaturg, but I think any artist, especially in the performing arts, needs a dramaturgical practice or a dramaturgical reflection. And the most limited definition, when you look at the production performance, is that of the organization of the actions, which Stefano gave this morning, also going back to Barba's definition of the weaving together of the actions. I prefer to use the largest definition, which is, for me, the dramaturgical reflection is an artist reflecting himself, or with the help from a dramaturg, on how to continuously develop his own language as an artist, and different strategies and methodologies to transform his own creative process. And as I said, you don't need a dramaturg for that. In the history of art, a lot of artists were very capable of doing it themselves. And also, particularly, for instance, in the history of dance, often there were other artists around that were not called dramaturgs, but had that function. In my vision, John Cage was Merce Cunningham's dramaturg, because he offered him tools and methodologies to develop his choreographic practice. In the same way that Marian van Kerkhove worked with André Keersmaker, but equally influential was Thierry Demey, who was a composer and film maker. And a lot of the compositional tools or principles that the Keersmaker developed came from Thierry as a composer like that. And again, as I said, like often there's been people around in the context of the artist that fulfill that role without being called. And so it's only when you call yourself a dramaturg, and I've been putting that on my name card for 15 years, that you also become one, that the dramaturgical practice becomes a person. Maaike Bleker, who's a Dutch theatrist and also dramaturg, she says that it becomes a dramaturg, a person, when you develop a dialogical practice with somebody else. And that's, again, one of the, for me, essential notions, that dramaturgy is always a dialogical practice, adding one more definition to the broad range we had already. So you don't need a dramaturg, and then as a result also the dramaturg needs to stay kind of invisible in the final result. And this is what Bart called the king without a kingdom or without a crown. Even if you contribute concrete things to the production, in the end you should stay invisible. And as a result of this invisibility, there's also a lot of myths about what the dramaturg does or doesn't do. And there's always been a lot of metaphors being used to define that. I collect some of them that I've collected myself, like the magpie, because you collect all what is possible, useful for the process. The outside eye is has been a metaphor that's been often used, which I reject, and I will come back to that. Like a compass bearer, a huge backpack of useful and non-useful bits of information. These are just some of the metaphors that are available in the literature on dramaturgy. To these metaphors, I have like a couple that I prefer myself. One that is of the midwife, like because you're there to accompany the birth of a new creation, of a new child. And as a good midwife, you try to interfere as little as possible. Most of the time you're just there to reassure the artist that the process is going well and that whatever is happening needs to happen. And you only interfere in crisis moments. So there's also something about, the more I do this job, it's also a practice in learning to be patient and not to interfere too soon. Because if the whole process comes to a good conclusion without you interfering, it's often better than when you do interfere like that. Another metaphor that I like to use is that one of a kitchen help. As a student, I used to work as a dishwasher in the kitchen of a lot of, in really some of the best restaurants in Antwerp, which was my hometown, and I learned a lot from the act of cooking. There's also the Balanchine, who's supposed to have said that choreography is like cooking, like it's the choice of ingredients, the choice of people. Again, what Bart said about the main decision for someone like Max Stewart is to bring the team together, and then it's a question of finding the right rhythm and the right order so that these ingredients, these people reinforce each other and not weaken each other. And as a dramaturg, kitchen help, dishwasher, often what I've been doing is passing recipes from one chef to the other without them knowing them, which is also this thing about that in the world we live, I think you're allowed to, not to appropriate things, but to take them, translate them, and make them your own like that. And then to come back to this metaphor of the outside eye, I think this is a very problematic one, and it's been criticized also by other scholars like André Lepecki and Mirjam van Imschoot. And here I just read something out of my essay because I think it's well articulated like that instead of me improvising it orally. I'm more than just my eyes. Following up an argument originally introduced by André Lepecki, Mirjam van Imschoot states that the notion of the outside eye separates the dramaturgical from the body of the artist. What Lepecki, and this is me quoting Mirjam, what Lepecki resists is the idea of the dramaturg, the eye, as the locus of power and knowledge, put at the disposal of a choreographer who, if we extend the metaphor, is perceived as being all body, a blind and dumb body waiting to be illuminated by sight and speech. So there has been, again, historically this clash between theory and practice. and between the dramaturg having the knowledge and the choreographer or the director being more the practitioner who then is in the body. And I think most of our colleagues dramaturgs would today resist that separation. So personally, I prefer the term outside body, and I used it for the first time for the program brochure of Raft, which was an improvisation project. So I've always been working as a dramaturg on dance improvisation, which is something I particularly like to do, realized by Marc Beauvin in Montreal. And I was present at all the rehearsals and the first series of public performances, and I felt my outside, silent body was an integral part of the show. Christel Stalpaert, who's the head of the theater department in Ghent University, and who also has written a lot on dance dramaturgy, she further deepened this notion of the outside body when she talks about corporeal dramaturgy. And again, I'm quoting Christel, the dramaturg's external gaze should in this case be expanded to the outside body, to a corporal tryout of the spectator's bodily capacity to read and make sense of an aesthetic of intensities. And then, so in the end, a lot, I think, of the discussions about dramaturgy, dance dramaturgy in particular, go back to this dichotomy that also Bart introduced between conceptual dramaturgy, where the meaning is defined in advance in preparation of a rehearsal process, and then the rehearsal process is a way to bring that, to physicalize that meaning, or more process-based dramaturgy, which was also coined by Marianne van Kerkhove, open dramaturgy, where you just collect materials you will work with, and the main material is the people you choose, and then you go into a process, and the kind of meaning, structure, significance is only discovered at the end of that process. And again, I would like you to read, there's a very seminal essay on dance dramaturgy by Marianne van Kerkhove. It was written in '94 already, and it's like a very short text, which is called Looking Without a Pencil in the Hand. And I will come back to that in the second part, because it's already there is a whole manifesto, no? To look without a pencil in the hand. That's what you should do as a dramaturg. It's a short essay in 12 short statements, and it's like a manifesto about both the methodology, but also the ethics of what a dramaturg should be. And it's still the text that is most referred to in the literature on dance dramaturgy. And I want to quote two small parts, one part from this text, and the other is actually from another text that she wrote in the same period. And this is her definition of this open form of dramaturgy. And this is Marianne van Kerkhove. The kind of dramaturgy that I'm familiar with has nothing to do with the concept dramaturgy that has been very fashionable since Brecht in the German theater. The kind of dramaturgy I relate to and that I have tried to apply in the theater as well as dance has a process-based character. One chooses to work with materials from different origins, text, movements, images, objects, ideas. The human material, the actors, dancers, is clearly the most important. Their personality, rather than their technical abilities, is the basis for the creative process. The theater director or choreographer starts working with these materials during the rehearsal process. She observes how these materials behave and develop. It's only at the end of the process that a concept, a structure, a more or less defined form reveals itself. And I want to read one other citation that's always been very inspirational about this ethics of the dramaturg and the dramaturg necessarily staying invisible. And this is also Marianne van Kerkhove in this seminal article, Looking Without a Pencil in the Hand, where she says, dramaturgy is a limited profession. The dramaturg must be able to handle solitude. But about the artist being alone, but I think the dramaturg also has a certain solitude. He, she has no fixed abode. He, she does not belong anywhere. The work he does dissolves into the production, becomes invisible. He, she always shares the frustrations and yet does not have to appear on the photo. The dramaturg is not, perhaps not quite or not yet an artist. Anyone that cannot or can no longer handle this serving and yet creative aspect is better out of it. So this is a kind of more general introduction. And then in my own thinking in my own practice as a dramaturg, having had the luck to work with major choreographers over a long period of time, I come to think about my function. I have like three functions that are all there all the time, but also can be activated more or less depending on the needs of the process. And the first function is that of being a witness, and I think the second, I will zoom into that more. The second one is being a dialogue partner, just being there to have a dialogue during, before and after rehearsals. And then the third one is this notion of playing with organizations, where I compare myself to that of a film editor, where again, helping the artist edit the work, but in such a way that you neither interfere with the content or the aesthetics of it, because it's the film directors, it's the choreographers' content, and it's her story, it's her aesthetics. So you develop a craft in editing, but you support it so that you hand it over to the choreographer without trying to interfere too much with the aesthetics or the content of the work. And for me, this editing role, just one more thing to say about it, has become more and more also about organizing the rhythm of a piece. Because I think the rhythm is the essential part of organizing a form. Like for me, rhythm is the DNA of artistic form. And so there's a craft in how to organize the rhythm of a particular performance in function of the choices that the artist has made, like that. But now to zoom in, for me, the act of dramaturgy always starts with being a witness of an artist's process, which is also something that Bart said earlier. And I go back to my original studies, which were in theater. And for me, one of the first inspirational texts, and it's also an iconic text, is this short text by Bertolt Brecht about the street scene, where he kind of describes how an accident in the street becomes a performance the moment that there's a witness to this incident. And Brecht even uses the witness not only as the ideal spectator, but also as the ideal actor. It's the witness retelling what he has seen, what has happened, that should be the model for the actor in the epic theater. So just reading the quote here, for practical experiments I usually picked up as my example of completely simple natural epic theater an eyewitness demonstrating to a collection of people how a traffic accident happened. And I've always been, and there's many other both theoreticians and practitioners that have picked up on this notion of the witness being the ideal spectator of the performance, or in a way that as artists we create work for the audience to become witnesses. One other, for me, very influential and inspirational person, and also a good friend, is Tim Etchells, the initiator of the theatre collective, British theatre collective Forced Entertainment, but he also, meanwhile, has developed an extensive visual art practice. And in one of his, in the main book about the work of Forced Entertainment, about their creative process, which is, I forget now the title, it will come back. Tim talks about how also for him, he wants the spectator to become witnesses. And the quote is a little bit longer, but I'll read it here. The artist Chris Burden described those watching him that night not as an audience or as spectators, but as witnesses. It's a distinction I come back to again and again, and one which contemporary performance dwells on endlessly, because to witness an event is to be present at it in some fundamental ethical way, to feel the weight of things and one's own place in them, even if that place is simply for the moment as an onlooker. So there's something about the witness taking also the responsibility of what is happening. And again, a similar thing, another example of that is Ann Cooper Albright, an important American dance critic. She wrote a book, Choreographing Differences, which was one of the first scholarly studies about different bodies in dance. So different able bodies, different genders. And in introduction to this book, she described how for her something changed when she felt that she transformed from a spectator to a witness, actually watching the performance La Tristessa Complice, which is one of the early works by Alain Platel, the Ballet de l'Abbé. And again, I'm just reading the long quote here. To witness something implies responsiveness, the responsibility of the viewer towards the performer. It is radically different from what may be called a consuming gaze that says, here you entertain me, I bought a ticket and I'm going to sit back and watch. In contrast, what I call witnessing is much more interactive. It's a kind of perceiving with one's whole body that is committed to a process of mutual dialogue. There are precedents for this responsive watching in Quaker meetings, African-American notions of bearing witness, as well as the aesthetic theory of rasa in classical Indian dance, to mention only a few of such examples. So for me, for me there's an understanding or a belief that the origin of art, performing arts in particular, has always been a kind of a reenactment. Art as a ritual practice has always been a reenactment of something that happened to the individual, like in a rite of passage, or to the community, like for instance after losing or winning a war, and to reenact these events in front of an audience, the audience being the community, so that the community could become the witness of these events. And becoming a witness has this, for me, this double meaning. It's the witness is also there to remember the events. So it's also about the witness that, through the witness that the work will live on, or that it will be passed on outside of the performance space. Even if then, for me, also the word remember is in English is a powerful word where it's about remembering. So it's also about deconstructing it and reconstructing it. There's a subjective element in it. So through the spectator becoming witness, the work lives on, but it will also transform. It will also change, and this will be for every spectator different. So this is for me the essential of performing arts. Relationship between performers, stage and audience. And then the dramaturg is, I think one of the most important aspects of the dramaturg is to bring this witness role already inside the studio and inside the process. And this is also why I call dramaturgy a creative and somatic practice. Because I think by being, even by being a silent witness in the studio while observing the process happening, you already influence it. And like most of the time when I'm in the studio, I don't interfere, except when I'm invited to by the choreographer. But I know that through my presence, I will influence already, for instance, the way the choreographer and the dancers articulate with each other, because there is this witness towards them in this presence, and this will influence their relationship like that. And then this is for me also a creative tool in the sense that I have to prepare myself to that in a somatic way. I have my own yoga practice, and my own yoga practice there, which I kind of do during being hours in the studio, is basically there to keep myself engaged, to recharge my energy so that I can witness as much as possible. Or I play also with my distance. I think a lot of dramaturgs, and Stefano used the word proximity. Like in the past, we talk a lot about dramaturgy being the dramaturg, the one who keeps a distance, again, the outside body or outside eye. But in present-day literature on dramaturgy, we also talk as much about proximity. But it's not one or the other, it's the play between that. And I play in a creative, intuitive way with how close I get to the process or how far away I go. And these days, I like to join. Sometimes I might be different from a lot of my colleagues, but for instance, in the early days of a creative process, I often join the performers in, for instance, when they do simple improvisations and when it's not too technical, because I want to have a physical experience myself of what is researched, but also because getting so close to them, they forget that I'm this outside person watching them. But then I can go away, and then when I come back, they notice again that I'm there. So I play with my presence. Or another tool that I use often is like I play with the angle that I watch things. Like I don't like to watch rehearsals frontal. the frontal position is for me the last thing. It's at the end of a rehearsal process that so I like to find an angle in the space where I can watch it so that they forget that I'm there, and so then when I make myself felt again, it does kind of have a direct impact like that. What else would I like to say about this witness role? So for me, this witness is essential in my dramaturgical practice. I think there's this notion of the spectator becoming witness, bringing that inside the process. And it also has become, I think, in a lot of contemporary practices, performing practices, it has also become quite common to put the witness position on the stage. Again, somebody like Hans Thies Lehmann in the post-dramatic theater, he talks about the notion of Blickregie, so how to direct the gaze of the audience. And in contemporary practice, it's often done by other performers becoming temporary witnesses inside the constellation of the performance, and by the spectators seeing the performers watch each other, you direct the gaze of the audience. So there's always been a practice, I think in contemporary performance practice, of directing the gaze through putting the witness on stage at some moments. And then I would like to give you one very concrete example of, and it's not one of the major ones, but it's a very personal and very dear one, of this notion of the witness being important, both the witness as the spectator being a witness, but also the witness being inside the performance, and my role as a dramaturg. And the example I want to use is an interdisciplinary artist, Teddy Tafel. She was from Montreal, Canada. She was originally trained as a choreographer, but then she also developed herself as a video artist. And these days she creates site-specific works where she often combines video images and live performance. And this particular project, which is called Everyday, it's for me also the link, I think, to the end of this day, which is the microdramaturgy and the macrodramaturgy, how the witness is also, or the role of witnessing the environment is also a way to connect to the inside, to the outside, and to the larger world. And I just have to, before I explain anything, I would like you to just to show a short 4-minute video clip about the work, but I have to see what I can go out here. Yes, and then I'll explain the work. So, how can you quickly help me, because it's not my computer? Just to go in the big screen here. Thank you. Yeah, this one. Yeah. Thank you. Is it working? Because it's not working.
It needs to charge a little bit.
It's the internet, like. While we're trying to get the images, maybe I'll start reading a little bit the explanation of the project, and hopefully okay, technology. So I can show you just a photograph as well, which is less animated, but still. So can I go? As I said, there's a notion of witness, but there's also the notion of dramaturgy being a dialogical practice. And so for me also, the other thing that's very concrete is each time to find the concrete time and place, and also the concrete form to have this dialogue with the choreographer. And in a number of cases, these have become real correspondences, like through letter writing. This notion of correspondence is also something that's been very inspirational, and I took it from the Scottish anthropologist Tim Ingold. And he says correspondence is essential in our world. It's how we relate to the world. It's how the artist also dialogues with his material. And it's both a sensitive, sensorial practice. And so with Teddy, in the preparation of her projects over a number of years, because she was in Montreal and I was in Europe, we developed this practice of sending each other's letters, and through the letter writing, developed the research or deepened the research in preparation of the actual process. And I'd like to read you one of her letters about this project Every Day, which also explains her research as an example of a concrete dramaturgical dialogical practice. Dear Guy, as I mentioned in my email, I would like to begin, or should I say, I feel ready to begin to write to you about this project I'm creating called Every Day. We finally have the presentation dates decided, so this is giving me a much needed frame in which to work towards. Of course, the festival is starting to ask for text and information, and this is another stimulation behind this first letter. I admit to moments of overwhelm and doubt. Again, this notion that the dramaturg creates a space where the choreographer can express his doubts. The work feels so elusive and unwielding at times, difficult to envision in its final form, the best structure to hold the various threads. As you may recall, we have been exploring the parameters of these public performances for the past 3 years, summertime primarily, as we work only in outdoor spaces. Lots of lines of exploration, experimentation have been followed, with varying numbers of dances, solo, duo, trio, 4 or 5 people, in all sorts of locations around the city. Some of the research is nomadic, following of 1 or 2 performers through the streets and alleys, parks and parking lots of many different quarters downtown, residential, industrial, at times weaving through several types of neighborhoods. The other form that the research has taken is what I'm calling infiltrations, where we work in a single site and the performers meet and separate, enter and exit in the space. For now, this research is happening in parks, as they are more contained spaces. The general public tends to enter and stay, rest for a bit. They're also a kind of oasis in the middle of the city, places where we are not simply going from A to B, where we come to play, to reflect, to be with friends, family, where we come simply to be, spaces where we experience a greater sense of intimacy with place, with each other. So these are 2 parts of the research that we'll be focusing on for the next 14 days, for 14 days of performance. My thought is to present something each day, sometimes more than one thing, like 2 solo walks, and offer a mixture of locations throughout. The festival Les Escales Improbables seems to be the perfect situation of the work, as they generally present very alternative approaches. For Every Day, I'm interested in how performance can be inserted into the public space so that the audience is able to see both the performance and the actions of the general public. I'm asking the performers to be in a place of response, to allow their choice to come from where they are, from the architecture, design, the sounds, the activities, the weather, the feelings stirred up, the imagination triggered. But all choices must be considered inside the context of remaining discreet, under the radar, so that the general public remains unaware for the most part. Of course, there are moments where we slip over the radar and then return to normal. In this, I'm equally interested in exposing socially coded ways of behaving by pushing against these restrictions, by adding a more playful, poetic, interactive connection to place, by giving us permission to directly respond to our immediate environment and the people, activities that inhabit it. This can be as simply as walking the very edge of a sidewalk, marking the division between pedestrian and traffic, or standing still next to an elderly woman seated on a bench, drawing our attention to her in a gentle, unobtrusive way. In keeping with this desire to interact with our surroundings, to draw attention to where we are, to allow greater ranges of possible connection than our agreed upon rules of behavior and use of space, we explore parts that are off the beaten path, sitting on the curb, lying down on the sidewalk, curling up at the base of a tree, standing too close to the edge of a busy street. Depending on how over the radar we are, on how many people are around, these actions can be brief or enduring. Performers are always conscious of the tension between total abandon and how they are being seen by people just going about their day. The role of the invited public is perhaps more active and aware, more participatory than usual. In order for the performers to live discreetly, immersed in the daily lives or the general public, the invited audience must also stay under the radar. Of course, numbers will be kept to a minimum. 1 person for the nomadic walks and maximum 6 for the infiltrations. They will also be able to decide how to see the work, deciding on distance or proximity what to look at. Often in my witnessing, I'm just as frequently drawn to watching a passerby or a scene between a parent and child. My hope is that the performers are opening up our gazes to include more, to notice more. This raises the very real possibility, especially in the infiltration events, that nobody is actually seeing what you are doing. In the case we are really never sure, this willingness to be seen, this not knowing if you are, this need to therefore see oneself. I know that my initial desire when I began this process was to see what it felt like to bring the practice of authentic movement onto the street, eyes open. Obviously, there are limits to what can be fully followed, how trusted the environment is. Again, who is seeing? And yes, this opportunity to engage with the world in this way, this continual porous exchange between internal states and external realities, was and is so compelling. This giving permission, giving back permission, was delightful to me, both to do and to see another doing. Life and art intimately intertwined. I'll stop there for now, but I do intend to continue going further into my intentions and the challenges that are such a part of this investigation. Be well. Do we have like 5 more minutes to conclude? Or because I lost track from when we start. So just one concrete example of like Teddy's work of creating the witness, exploring the witness role as the essential part of a creative practice. And then parallel to my role as a dance dramaturg, I also developed performance practice together with the Canadian choreographer Lynn Snelling, which we called Rewriting Distance. And it's an improvisational practice that we teach, that we perform, and that we also just practice in the studio with people that we invite. Originally it was called Repeating Distance, and it was very much about a research how you could combine movement and language together in an improvised way, because Lynn, before she became a dance choreographer, she was trained as a journalist. My original training was in linguistics before I moved to theater and to dance. So we always had this interest in, which again seemed to be an underlying theme of today as well, how language and movement can be combined. And then we did that practice Repeating Distance for many years, performing it in many places. And then a couple of years ago we decided that we wanted to renew the practice, and we started to include writing as well, but writing inside the performance, and explore how writing as a physical action can also engage an audience. And then the other notion of rewriting was that we would invite other artists to work with us and propose us ways to rewrite our own artistic practice. But then the origin of the practice was also it's a very open form, and we chose as a very simple spatial form where we have an audience, a performance space with performers in it, and in between these two spaces is what we call the witness chair. And that was the only thing that we defined, that one of the performers would always be a witness of the other ones performing, and that by looping the role of witness and performer, of being receptive and being articulate, we would create this improvised narrative in the moment, which was always also a narrative, a poetic narrative in dialogue with the actual physical spaces we were in, both the concrete physical space we're in, but also the larger urban environment like that. And these are just some images at different moments in the research in different places, just to see the witness role again inside a performance practice, being part of performance itself. This is, and all the whole practice is being archived. So whenever we performed it, it's being archived on the website with the text that was written inside the performances, and also only with black and white photography, which was like a conscious choice because we thought like it's an improvised practice, so a video would each time so different, so that the video would not render it. So we have a photographer, always the same photographer who travels with us, who takes like 2,000 black and white photographs, and then the photographs are narrowed down to 200. They're put in kind of chronological order on the website, so that also the space that is created in between the photographs somehow triggers the imagination of the audience, like hopefully the original performance did like that. And then to conclude with, just to promote my new book, which is only out for less than a month, but which again goes back to this notion that for me dramaturgy is a dialogical practice, and also in my writing I've developed a preference for the writing to be more polyphonic or dialogical, and the book is actually a series of 14 conversations that I had with major choreographers like Sidilar Besherkawi, Akram Khan, Alain Platel, Hoffe Schechner, Jonathan Burrows, Rosemary Butcher, also the dramaturg Ruth Little, and they were done at Sadler's Wells in front of a live audience as an event in itself, for which the audience bought a ticket. They were recorded, and with very little editing, they were published. And for me, personally, I'm always amazed. The oldest talks date from 2008, but when you read them today, they still have this moment of presence and feeling. It was not about one production, it was not a traditional after-talk performance, but it was about their whole body of work, and especially their vision on the body in the work like that. So thank you for being such an attentive audience, and then we can have some questions as well.
Okay. First, thank you. Second, I want to select some of the things that triggers my attention and actually my concern concerning my position as an Italian artist. So I would like actually, maybe, I don't know if you want, but I just copied here one of your structure as these concerning the creative, let's say creative practice and production and politics, I would say. So within this scheme, I find all the concerns that can that maybe I will ask you to articulate going toward this topic of ethics and aesthetic. So if you like to.
It's
another book.
It's another talk of like maybe 45 minutes. To try to summarize it. Again, it goes back to this thing that in my work as a dramaturg, my personal focus or interest shifted from I'm working on a production and I want to help the choreographer to make this the best production possible, to I want to help this person to develop his language, to what kind of tools can I offer an artist, a choreographer, to constantly transform his own creative process. And then it's less about, because if I offer him tools and methodologies, strategies to transform his creative process, also the product, the work resulting from it will transform. And it's not up to me to judge what is right or wrong, or what is successful or more or less successful. And so I started to think about what is the essence for me of the creative process. And this was during a sabbatical period, and I was spending time in Greece, in Athens, and also in Cyprus. And there I discovered these little clay figurines which are a representation of the human body, and they're put into the graves to accompany the dead. And the oldest, one of these oldest figurines is called the cross figurine. And you find them in the Cycladic Museum in Athens. They date from 3,000–4,000 before Christ. And this was like a epiphany, like an aha-erlebnis. Okay, the cross, before being a religious symbol, it's a representation of the body. It's basically the polarities of the body, with the vertical axis always being the axis of knowledge between sky and earth, and the horizontal axis being the actions we do in life, between a more receptive side, like water, and a more active side, fire, the yin-yang principle. And I thought, okay, if this is true, then I should also be able to translate this towards the creative process. And what are, for me, these four elements in the four polarities of the cross that are essential for the creative process? And these are my terms, and I think you can also replace them by others. And then I start, okay, the horizontal axis is between being receptive, again, being the witness, and being articulate, which in case of the art is to create a form. So originally I talked about articulation, but today I would more talk about formation, which is about finding your form, but formation also in the geological sense, that it's a continuously ongoing process that never stops. No? It's like a geographical mountain that grows or dies. It's an ongoing process. So this is the tension between receptive and active, perception and formation. And then the vertical axis was for me the tension between intuition, again this importance of intuition that was already mentioned today, and experience. And where, for me, intuition, again, is something also that I do a lot as a dramaturg, also especially my teaching with young artists, to trust the intuition, because it's the intuition that will help the choice making. You have a creative process is constantly making choices, and there are no right or wrong choices, but every choice has the consequences. This is the lesson of my first yoga teacher. So you have to trust your intuition in making the choices. But then often through making work, you build up also a body of work that you literally integrate in yourself and becomes your experience, so that you can reproduce it, pass it on in teaching. So it's again a dialectic, and the polarities are not, they're not in opposition, they're complementary like that. And then for me the creative process was about how these four polarities, perception, intuition, articulation, formation, experience, how they're constantly active, but at different moments you reinforce one more than the other like that. And then again, as a dramaturg, for instance, I would also describe that maybe the challenge of the article is to go, the challenge of the art for the artist is to go from the intuition to find the form that expresses his intuition. So that's very much part in that part of the attention. So then as a dramaturg, often I would stay more within the receptive side, perception, and also using my experience of previous processes, having worked with these artists before, or having worked with other artists, to kind of ground that challenge like that.
Thank you very much.
I hope this is clear, because it's a story that I would prefer to have more time to explain.
Yeah. But I'm taking the chance to have you here in order to develop as much as possible your notions and the questions that are important today. I will go for a second, if possible, and then maybe I open to the audience, if it's okay for you. I will give you another little bomb, and then you will decide if you want to deal with that, or you can narrow it down if it's too much. I was happily touched by a word. You said re-singularization, a process of re-singularization. Concerning artistic practice and the ecology of artistic practice, let's say, or production, even production. So I would like to This is my question, but then of course you can you can adapt it or translate it as you want. I would be curious how, as after we will talk about environment and the common. So where is or what is more important in this process of resingularization toward the common in an ecological way?
Again, this is a topic of another book, which is called The Ethics of Art. And actually, the term resingularization doesn't belong to me. It comes from my colleague and friend Pascal Giele, who's a Flemish art sociologist. And The Ethics of Art was co-edited with him, and he explores this much more in his introduction. And probably I referred in my kind of essay in the book to his notion. And I think when we, maybe I'll tell a little bit about the history of that book. The Ethics of Art, Ecological Practices in Contemporary Art, or Ecological Turns in Contemporary Art, was the follow-up of a conference I curated. And it's interesting because I was asked to curate this conference for the European Dance House Network, which is a major network of European dance houses. I think there are now between 25 and 30 members in all European countries. The Italian partner is Bassano del Grappa. And for 4 years they had a European-funded project, which was, and part of the project there was also every year a conference. And I was asked to create a conference, and in the preparation of the conference, I was also at that point doing a residence at the University of British Columbia in Canada. They have 2 campuses in Vancouver, another one in Kelowna. In Kelowna is a very particular ecology because it's a desert climate in Canada, where, for instance, the best Canadian wine, comes from. But as a result, because of the wine industry, they also started to destroy the ecology, or the ecology was, the desertification was going faster. So within the arts departments there, they started to develop a lot of ecological practices. And while I was there, I was also reading a book like The Spell of the Senses of David Abram, who's a phenomenological philosopher, American, but he's also one of the major thinkers in like radical ecology. And Abram is also questioning this second that we lost the connection with the environment, amongst others, through written language becoming more and more abstract. And so as a way to reconnect with the environment, it is through the senses, it is through a somatic physical practice. And so through that I was inspired to make the theme of this conference. And the Ethics of Art was a bit, I think it's too big of a title, but it was much more about this notion, how as artists do we, the main question was based behind it, how as artists, as dancers, choreographers, how do we reconnect with the environment, again the micro and the macro, through the body, through the senses. And then Pascal, in his study and reading, and he was very much inspired by Agamben, came also about, there's also something about this notion of resingularization that you do as an artist, where so much of our society is about, through the media and through the politics, is like this notion of erasing the specificity of a particular ecology or a particular relationship with that ecology. And so what artists can do, and which is an ethical stance, is to re-singularize this connection between themselves as an individual and their immediate environment. And that was 2 topics that came out of that conference and then were translated into the book like that.
Maybe then I ask for question. Qualcuno ha domande? Thank you for these very interesting topics.
I was struck by an expression you use to describe the dramaturg. It's like the outside body. And it sounds like an expression that, like a lexical came from quantum mechanics or phenomenology in a certain term. And I was wondering when you said this expression, how much the dramaturge works as a phenomenological device for the creator in a certain way. Not only for the piece itself, but for the creator, like an outside body, a witness, but also like a certain kind of consciousness that goes toward like the piece and the artist itself. So I wonder if you, because I don't know if you have something to say about it, or if it's a vision you have when you say outside body, or it's a relation you want to describe or not.
Again, at that time, because the term was circulating a lot about this outside eye, but then the eye is again reducing it to the visual, and also the eye, often like the eye of God, often like the all-knowing, which are two concepts that are very reductive. So the idea was to say, like, when I'm present, whether in the dialogue one-on-one with the artist or in the studio as a witness, I'm there with all my body. That was the first reason, and I experience the process and also the dialogue somatically with all my body. Like, and I don't know, I mean, if you have, for instance, a yoga practice, it happens regularly with me that you're talking to someone and there's the discourse, but at the same time, other parts of your body also resonate in different ways. So and this is what I call also that the dramaturgical practice can become somatic, because just the presence of my body in the process will influence it, even if I don't say anything or don't interfere at all. Me being there will influence what's happening. So this was one of the reasons to not to reduce it to this part, but to say that the whole body is involved. The second thing is what I already said about the creative principle for me as a dramaturg is to play with how close this body gets. And sometimes I dive. It has happened that I jump into rehearsal with my body, like, and that. I remember one instance, to make it concrete. We were working on a production. The theme was fear. The dancers were improvising about the fear for vertigo. Nothing interesting was happening because they were kind of mimicking the idea of vertigo, but there was no reality of that experience because we were working in a nice studio with a good floor. So I had the intuition that I would throw in my body, and I literally put my body in front of the dancer, so he had to step on me, and then suddenly the unbalance of stepping on my body became, and then a whole scene out of that, also as an example of how you do contribute without being recognized for that. Then a whole scene was built out of that, using the technical skills of the dancers, where the stepping onto each other became more and more dangerous, and on the vertigo became really real. But that was for me like just to actually use my physical, also allow myself, and I feel intuitively that it's useful to put my body into the research, the collective research that is happening. So this playing with how close you get or how far you go by literally disappearing and then coming back to the process and see that a lot of things have happened while you have gone away that you don't understand or that you question, and then using that as a trigger for the dialogue with the choreographer, and also to stimulate the process with new input like that. That's two concrete examples like that. I hope this answers your question somehow.
C'è ancora una domanda?
Bah, io ne avrei un'altra, se no. Mi posso parlare in italiano? Ah, ok.
I can translate
C'è un topic, e lo dico in inglese, bravo. C'è un tema tra artisti che è molto, molto diffuso, molto importante, la relazione tra artisti. Diciamo che è un tema che ritorna sempre quando si discute tra artisti, è tipo cosa dovrebbe essere la relazione tra artisti. E ci sono delle soluzioni, a volte prende la faccia di un sindacato, la union, o potrebbe essere una sorta di comunità isolata. Ci sono tante risposte date dagli artisti a altri artisti. Ma c'è nella figura del drammaturgo una sorta di situazione ideale, una figura ideale di relazione tra artisti. E mi chiedo se può riflettere o se ha già riflettuto su una sorta di catena di interscambio di rituali drammaturgici tra artisti, tra virgolette, per organizzare la relazione tra artisti.
I think it's a good question. It's a very important question. I think what happened, and I'm quite critical about that, is that although the arts community often criticizes the economical and political reality, they have often been copying that reality as well. And the arts market is as neoliberal as the rest of the economy is, and in a lot of, especially Western countries, the fact that art is being associated, that also there's 1% of very famous and very rich artists, and then 99% that has to struggle to survive. But it's this 1% also in the eye of the public that has make this association between art and rich. And if, for instance, in the UK, they say that arts education doesn't need to be funded anymore because it's the hobby for the rich. And they say the same have been said the same in Holland, to cut funding for artists, saying that it's the hobby for the rich left elite. We are partly responsible for that ourselves because we have. I mean, art is associated. Successful artists are associated with wealth like that. While originally the artist has always been, and I think in other cultures this is still more the case. The artist is somebody that gives to society, and society supports the artist for that. And it was very much based art originally. And there are more critical thinkers, like this is the research of Susan Leigh Foster, Bojana Kunst. So how to rethink the working conditions, the economical conditions of how to support ourselves as artists. And one of these notions is to go back to a gift economy. And I think, for instance, it is a responsibility of successful artists to give back to society by also supporting the next generation of artists. And I think because there is something about the notion of generosity that is very essential, and it has for me, like when I evaluate as a spectator a work of art, it's less about the aesthetics, because also the time we live, it's become very eclectic. My own taste is very eclectic, but I think I can have a sense developed again by many years of watching work when the work is generous towards the audience, or whether it just asks for attention like that. So, especially in performing arts, we know that the relationship between the performer, the stage, and the audience is very much one about. It's a loop of generosity. The generosity of your attention, I should give back by giving you something back like that nurtures you. And I think we should also, there's a responsibility to find new economical models to translate that also, where we take responsibility for each other. And at the same time, continue to defend ourselves as a community towards politics and economics and find support there as well. But it should start with the solidarity with our own community before we can criticize. And there's a book, but I now forget the author. It was I think already written in the 60s and 70s. It's called The Gift, and it uses the potluck culture. Mouse. It's not Mouse. It's another. Mouse also wrote about the gift economy, but this is particularly about. But it's an American. An American. I think he was an ambassador, and he writes already in that book. He says artists about this notion that artists who are successful should give a percentage, literally, of their profits to the next generation of artists to make work, and I think it's maybe a topic, but I think and again some are doing it by by creating in their structures space for the next generation to research and develop like that. That is a part answer again, but